very briefly. I only have a minute or so.
I was concerned that he had warnings that this person was involved with prostitutes, and I talked to him because if that was the case, I would have been looking at significant discipline. It was not the case with him. I even went and looked at the letters that were sent. The letters.
And so what did he say? I mean, I wish I had a tape recording of that conversation. But right. In 30 seconds, what was said by him?
He said when he was aware of it, he was notified by the embassy, the RSO, of what had happened. He was told about the incident. He called the agent in. That was the first he knew that this agent was involved in prostitutes. He called the agent in, told the agent, "You're out of here. You're going home." He sent him TDY back to the States until he could.
So, were they suspended at all?
I'm sorry?
I mean, you said he sent them back to the United States.
Yes. The agent received 14 days off.
And so did you think that was sufficient?
The regional director took action when he heard about it, and he took action immediately after to put in place some mechanisms to make sure that those types of behaviors were reported promptly.
Who was the highest ranking DEA official between 2001 and 2008 who was aware of these misconduct issues?
Are you talking about the Bogota incidents?
No, I'm talking about well, let me change that to 2005 to 2009.
That they were aware of it? Probably.
Yeah, the highest ranking person.
Probably a group supervisor.
Did you have power to discipline on the level of a regional?
I could discipline the regional director. He's an SES.
So you could have fired him. Is that right?
I couldn't fire him. You have to show misconduct for him to be fired. Mm-hmm. But with what the law allows me to do with an SES, he was counseled.
So you do feel that he did something wrong?
He failed to report it when he learned about it.
And so you failed to discipline, other than counseling.
The discipline available to me, appropriate discipline, was to reprimand him.
Well, who came up with the suspension then? I'm confused.
In SES, the discipline, there has to be misconduct.
Right.
And the discipline has to be 15 days or more. Reporting it to an embassy and working it out locally with the embassy rather than reporting it to OPR would not raise to that level. It's the only time that's happened with him, would not raise to the level to be misconduct.
Just one more question.
So I counseled him.
If he had reported it, he was supposed to report it to the Office of Professional Responsibility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if he had reported it, there was a possibility that the agent would lose their security clearances. Is that right? Is that right, Mr. Horowitz? Do you know that?
They certainly could lose their security clearance if the process was followed through as it's supposed to be followed through.
And if they lost the security clearance, does that mean they then lose their job?
Yes, like the 3 Cartagena agents. If you lose your security clearance, then you cannot be a special agent.
So, in looking at it in hindsight, the regional director, do you feel that he received appropriate discipline?
I believe he made a mistake by not reporting it in. He took action, but it wasn't the right action. And that has not happened with him in the past. And he's done a number of things in Colombia since that incident to ensure that this does not happen again.
Do you think there's a culture problem here?
I believe there may have been a culture problem.
May have been
a culture problem.
When did it stop?
Years back.
When did it stop? When did it stop? When you said may have been, so you're assuming that, I assume you have a date that you think it stopped? And I'd love to know what it is. And why you say that.
When you see that these parties and what was happening in 2000 to 2004 were by one group of agents within Bogota, Colombia, I would say that's a culture problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonard, I'm new to the committee, so I'm going to ask you questions that I'm just curious as to the answer because I'm very confused. You said some things today that I think strike me as being unusual. They may be true, and I'm certain if anybody back home is watching it, they don't understand it either. You said you can't fire people. Why can't you fire people? Everybody else could be fired. Why can't you fire people that work for you?
Under the civil service laws, I can't intervene in the disciplinary process, and that's why DEA's process, similar to some of the other agencies, is a 3-tiered process. The administrator, the deputy administrator, management cannot intervene in the disciplinary process, or that's a prohibited personnel practice.
Who can fire people when they commit misconduct, egregious misconduct like participating in cartel-funded prostitution?
Our deciding officials.
Who in your agency, who is a deciding official?
We have 2 deciding officials. They're senior DEA 1811s with prior OPR experience. They make all of the disciplinary decisions for the agency.
Are they senior to you or junior to you?
They're junior to me.
Could you recommend that they fire somebody? So you're saying you can't fire somebody, but somebody junior to you can fire somebody. Is that what you're telling us?
My position as administrator, under the Civil Service Act, we have to follow certain civil service protections. And so our system is set up that the discipline is decided by these 2 senior people within DEA, deciding officials who have
senior people, but not senior to you. But I get that. Then, so okay, let's say that you wanted to fire these people. Let's say you saw some activity that merited somebody getting fired. Did you ever? By the way, have you ever seen that since you've worked there? Does any of this conduct that we've talked about today in these couple dozen sex parties, in your mind, merit dismissal?
The activity that's been explained today, I believe, not knowing all the facts, not knowing...
How can you possibly... I can't let you off the hook like that, Ms. Leonhardt. How do you not possibly know all the facts by now?
Not knowing the same facts that the deciding officials look at, which are called the Douglas factors. So not knowing that piece, only knowing what the behavior was and what the investigations show. I took action last year to put the agency on notice that activity like that, and I named it prostitution, and named 4 or 5 other things, required significant discipline. And that put our deciding officials and our Board of Conduct on notice.
Do you have any idea how absurd all of that sounds to an ordinary human being?
I can see someone not knowing the civil service system and not understanding our system would think that.
All right, let's assume, because I think I just asked you if you saw anything that merited somebody being dismissed, and you didn't say yes, which I assume means you meant no. But let's assume, for sake of this discussion, you saw something that merited dismissal. What would you do?
I can't intervene in the process the way the law is set up.
How do you start the process?
What I can do is put the agency on notice, like I did last year, that this will not be tolerated, and that I, in writing, told the deciding officials and the Board of Conduct that these kinds of behaviors required significant discipline.
Mr. Horowitz, Mr. Perkins, is it like this at the other agencies? Does everybody deal with these arcane rules at other agencies?
Congressman, I can't speak for the other agencies, but for the FBI, we are exempt from Title V and civil service rules, regulations, and statutes. Director Comey can and has summarily fired individuals. We do have a highly structured disciplinary process within the Bureau that will, as you go through the process, it raises it up to the appropriate levels for the appropriate level of punishment. There are occasions when the conduct is so egregious that the director can intercede and summarily dismiss somebody, and has.
Mr. Horowitz? My understanding is that the FBI is unique in that regard, as Mr. Perkins outlined, and that the other three law enforcement components of the department have to follow the Title V rules and the civil service rules.
One last question, Ms. Lienhart, then I'll wrap up. Is it true, Ms. Lienhart, that if you suggest a suspension longer than 14 days, and in all the examples that I've got the paperwork on these couple dozen events, no one was ever suspended for more than 14 days. Is it true that if you recommend, or if someone gets a suspension of more than 14 days, that a merit system protection board takes over the investigation and the handling of that matter?
Not quite. If the deciding officials dole out discipline and it's more than 14 days suspension, the employee can appeal it. And when the employee appeals it, it goes to the Merit System Protection.
And who takes over the investigation of the matter when the Merit System Protection Board gets involved?
No one takes over the investigation because the investigation has already been done. This is at the very end of the disciplinary process. So the DEA deciding official can say 30 days.
But is that internal to you or is it external to you?
The deciding officials is internal. The MSPB is external.
Thank the gentleman.
I thank the chairman. I asked both the chairman and the ranking member to. This is nuts. How we can't fix this, I have no idea. But clearly, she's telling us she doesn't have the legal authority to do what everybody on this committee thinks that she should have done. Maybe we should try and figure out a way to fix that.
Now I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Desalegn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say, as a new member of this body, I keep thinking I've gone through the looking glass and I won't do it again. And then you come to a hearing like this, and this just seems, on the surface, it's hard to believe. And it does bring a number of questions, including sort of the collateral consequences to drug dealers on the street and the larger problems we have to face in this country when people see this kind of different type of administration of justice. So, Mr. Horowitz, first question is, what was different, do you think, between ATF and the U.S. Marshal that your underlings, your mid-management people were able to access the information you asked for so quickly as opposed to the DEA or the FBI?
They've been fully cooperative throughout our reviews, have not raised legal objections, and have read the IG Act and complied with what we've asked for.
Is it a cultural thing? Is it an enforcement thing? Do you need more enforceability?
Well, certainly we don't have any enforceability at this point other than my testifying publicly and raising it to the...
Doesn't seem to be sufficient in this instance.
Folks. It ultimately turns out to be in some instances, but it is a problem, and it's a repeated problem.
Ms. Lienhart, so the individuals involved in these sex parties, the Rolex, the accepting sophisticated weapons, are they still employed?
The majority are still on the job.
And it's hard to believe, it seems completely counterintuitive, that they could go back to work with as little as 10 days suspensions and being model agents. Have you had to spend extra time overseeing their job performance?
Their supervisors, their special agents in charge, or their high-level bosses are aware of the conduct, and with the exception of one, we have not seen any misconduct since.
Do they have heightened supervision because of their past conduct?
The reason that the supervisors are made aware of what the conduct is so that they can put them in positions where they can have good supervision.
So go back to the questions I asked Mr. Horowitz. Why is it that it took so long to get this information? Why did it take so long for the IG to get the information from your underlings? Of being aware that didn't you feel at some point that you were spending too much time on this? Didn't you admonish people underneath your command that they should be more forthcoming to the IG?
Well, I knew early on that there was disagreement or misunderstanding in a couple of areas. What the scope of the audit was, that delayed it. What type of records they were looking for, that delayed it. I wish I would have known about all of those delays and I could have done something more about it. But at the end of the day, the reports did get to Mr. Horowitz, and with audits since, he and I we kind of have an agreement that if someone is going to deny something to the IG, that it has to be raised up to my level right away so that he and I can discuss it.
Sitting here, it seems like it's a question of management that you have to spend this amount of resources in something that's such an egregious case. It just seems a misappropriation of taxpayer funds. So, Mr. Horowitz, if the DEA had at that time the same exemption that the FBI has, would that have been a more efficient response by Congress in terms of making sure that the management tools were there?
Well, certainly on the personnel side and the discipline side, that would be something that could occur. Frankly, on the access issues and getting the records promptly, there's no reason why DEA and FBI shouldn't have done the same thing the Marshal Service and ATF did. They didn't question the scope of our audit. They didn't raise concerns about whether we could see names or see the facts or run the search terms. They just did it.
So that seems, Ms. Leonhardt, you're complicit in the management problems, and it's not just a culture problem. And with all due respect to your years of service, we heard this, I believe, from the IG when it came to the Secret Service. Sometimes you need somebody from the outside. So how do I defend your performance?
I think being a DEA agent and being within the agency, I can intervene in ways.
All evidence to the contrary, with all due respect in this case.
On this audit, I think that there was misunderstandings, misunderstandings of what the scope was, as well as misunderstandings on this Bogota case, or on this Bogota case.
Ms. Leonhardt,
it's not a closed case.
Excuse me, my time's expired. But for me to go back and talk to somebody in a poor section of my district or any of these members who have people who are selling drugs who say, well, how can you admonish us and want to make laws tougher for us when you let the DEA manage their own department this way is quite, it's counterintuitive, with all due respect. I yield back what time I have.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Leonhardt, if an agent stateside were soliciting a prostitute that was provided by a drug conspiracy he was investigating, what punishment would you recommend?
I can't recommend a punishment. I would just hope that would be thoroughly investigated and.
So you're telling me nobody cares what the administrator of the DEA thinks should happen to an agent? You're powerless to express your opinion. You have no First Amendment right when it comes to who works for your agency.
I have expressed my opinion.
What
in a
was
number
your
of
opinion?
ways.
What did you express? What did you think the
Last
proper
year-
sanction was?
Very briefly, I only have a minute or so.
I was concerned that he had warnings that this person was involved with prostitutes, and I talked to him because if that was the case, I would have been looking at significant discipline. It was not the case with him. I even went and looked at the letters that were sent. The letters were
And so
sent
what did he say?
agent.
I mean, I wish I had a tape recording of that conversation. But
Right.
in 30 seconds, what was said by him?
He said when he was aware of it, he was notified by the embassy, the RSO, of what had happened. Behaviors were reported promptly.
Who was the highest-ranking DEA official between 2001 and 2008 who was aware of these misconduct issues?
Are you talking about the Bogota incidents?
No, I'm talking about well, let me change that, 2005 to 2009.
That they were aware of it? Probably,
Yeah, the highest-ranking person.
probably a group supervisor.
Did you have power to discipline on the level of the regional?
I could discipline the regional director. He's an SES.
So you could have fired him, is that right?
I couldn't fire him. You have to show misconduct. for him to be fired.
Mhm.
But with what the law allows me to do with an SES, he was counseled.
So you do feel that he did something wrong?
He failed to report it when he learned about it.
And so you failed to discipline, other than counseling.
The discipline available to me, appropriate discipline, was to reprimand him.
Well, who came up with the suspension then? I'm confused.
In SES, the discipline, there has to be misconduct.
Right.
And the discipline has to be 15 days or more. Reporting it to an embassy and working it out locally with the embassy rather than reporting it to OPR would not raise to that level. It's the only time that's happened with him, would not raise to the level to be misconduct.
Just one more question.
So I counseled him.
If reporting now, if he had reported it, he was supposed to report it to the Office of Professional Responsibility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
Told about the incident. He called the agent in. That was the first he knew that this agent was involved in prostitutes. He called the agent in, told the agent, "You're out of here. You're going home." He sent him TDY back to the States until he could
so,
finalize the
were they
divorce.
suspended at all?
I'm sorry?
I mean, you said he sent them back to the United States.
Yes. The agent received 14 days off.
And so did you think that was sufficient?
The regional director took action when he heard about it, and he took action immediately after to put in place some mechanisms to make sure that those types of